Welcome to BECA in Context, a webinar series. This is a webinar series that explores the nature of our work, the work that we do as BECA in Honduras, through the experiences of our alumni. We're very excited tonight in our first inaugural webinar, and first of many, to welcome three program alumni who are all working in the legal field to defend the rights of our nation's most vulnerable residents, including undocumented children. We started planning our webinar back in October before the US elections, and little could we have imagined just how relevant the topic would be today. So we hope that you will enjoy this talk tonight, and there will be opportunities at the end to engage in questions with our alumni speakers, who I will introduce in just a moment. But before we get into that, for those of you that are new to BECA or interested in learning more, just a little bit about who we are as an organization. So BECA is a not-for-profit. We were founded in 2002, and we opened our first school with our first community partnership back in 2004. And since that time, since that initial partnership and that initial dreaming phase, we have grown into a fully community-supported bilingual school model that is now run in partnership with 3 low-income communities across Honduras. Our mission as BECA, as Bilingual Education for Central America, is to provide quality, affordable bilingual education to the educationally disenfranchised, while at the same time fostering meaningful cultural exchange. And with so much conversation today around immigration and protecting borders, we truly see this provision of bilingual education to the educationally disenfranchised as a solutions-oriented response to the many issues that impact both Central America and the United States, from economic development to job creation to violence and to drugs. If we are looking at those root causes of social injustice and we are working alongside community partners to effect positive and long-lasting change, we are essentially creating opportunities for the students and the children of Honduras to experience and to one day realize that economic and social equality and opportunity from within their home countries. So BECA as an organization, we pour the majority of our resources into recruiting, training, and providing support to English-speaking volunteers who commit to teaching with us for a minimum of 1 year. Each year we have about a third of our team return to teach with us for a second and sometimes a third year. For the upcoming school year, BECA is bringing in 35 Honduran and international teachers who will staff our 3 community schools across northern Honduras and really serve as the leaders in our mission of that high quality bilingual education and that cultural exchange. We're also at a very exciting phase of our development as an organization. Over the past 15 years, we have worked very hard to develop our schools, to implement a teacher training program that begins with a 6-week training in the summer and ongoing professional development throughout the year. We've developed custom fit-for-purpose curriculums that enable and equip our students with the skills necessary to be successful throughout their education with BECA, from kindergarten through 9th grade, and following that 9th grade graduation into their high school and tertiary education systems within Honduras. And now as we look to the future, we're looking for more ways to continue that investment in our programs and in our communities in Honduras. A few things that I'd love to highlight for you, both for alumni who are coming back to BECA and for those of you who are new to BECA. This past year, we began a social justice-oriented course called Culture in Context, which is a weekly discussion that's focused on collective action. It's focused on a discussion around the root causes of social injustice. It's focused on contextual understanding, which truly provides them with the tools necessary to best serve our Honduran communities. Also, as we look forward, we're preparing for more graduates. Our second partnership, Santa Monica Bilingual School, will soon be graduating 9th grade and will soon have more graduates from our programs, and we're looking for opportunities and for ways to not only engage with them as they continue on to high school and to university and to jobs, but also to find ways and lay the foundation and the groundwork for them to then return to us. This past year, one of our highest moments was when we saw Andres, a student who joined our program back in first or second grade when BECA was in its early years, who continued through our program, received a scholarship through our school at San Jeronimo Bilingual School, went on to teaching college, and is now employed as a full-time teacher at San Jeronimo Bilingual School, that same school where he began so many years ago. And we want to encourage and find ways to bring in more stories like this of graduates investing in our programs and investing in the communities that they're from. We're also looking to partner with new nonprofits across Honduras that will allow us to bring in more bilingual Honduran volunteers to continue to grow that Honduran empowerment of our volunteer program. We are also looking to invest in the development of our program, from things like curriculum to continued training to alumni support once you finish that year of service. And really at the core of all of this is affirming to our partners and to our communities, to our alumni and volunteers, that through these changing times, we are standing together side by side and working together to ensure a bright future for our Honduran students.
So tonight's talk, BECA in Context, is focused on our alumni who are working in the legal field. We're so excited to have with us tonight Lauren Fisher Flores, who was a BECA volunteer with us in 2005-2006. She's currently working as an attorney at the Kids in Need of Defense in Texas, working with Central American families. Lauren's commitment to BECA's mission in her post-BECA life includes not only her work as a lawyer representing vulnerable children, but also her Master's of Education and her spirit of service. This all led to Lauren joining BECA's board of directors for several years, and now she's focused on her work and focused on her life as a mom. We're also excited to welcome Hillary Hamill. She was a BECA volunteer 1 year after Lauren. She joined us in 2006 and volunteered from 2006 to 2007. She's currently working as an attorney at Bayview Hunters Point Community Legal, and she's working in San Francisco with some of San Francisco's most neglected neighborhoods. Hillary is an ideas woman, and we're very grateful for the many creative ideas and connections that she has shared with BECA and has helped us develop over the years, from her years of service on the ground in Honduras and her years of service as a BECA board member as well. And our last speaker tonight is Natalia Salazar. Natalia first joined BECA as a summer camp volunteer, and after her spending 2 summers in Honduras, she volunteered with us as program administrator from 2014 to 2016. This past year, she finished those two those 2 years of service, and we're very proud that the work that she has continued doing at the Florence Immigrant and Refugee Rights Project, working with unaccompanied and detained immigrant children and providing Know Your Rights presentations to those children. Great. So we are going to discuss with each of these speakers, with each of these wonderful alumni who are joining us tonight, about their experience in Honduras. Lauren, so we're going to start with you. So you were on the ground as a second grade teacher from 2005 to 2006. And for each of our volunteers, there's a moment when BECA's mission really comes to light. So for you, what was that moment? Where were you? What were you doing when the true meaning of high quality bilingual education, and doing so through a multicultural, intercultural partnership and exchange with the communities? What was the moment that crystallized for you?
You know, I went into BECA thinking about what I could give and feeling like coming out of undergraduate institution, you don't really have a lot of concrete skills to offer. So being able to go and teach for me was a way of using the skills that I had developed in college to be able to do something real. But I hadn't thought about what I would be getting back. And so I think that when Becca's mission really crystallized for me, I was at the home of one of my scholarship students, and the generosity of people who have very little, the way that the community welcomed us, and the fact that this family that was struggling to put food on their own table was making sure to feed me, um, made me really fully understand that ideal of cultural exchange rather than just a one-sided interaction.
Thank you, Lauren. And did you find that with other families as well in the community, that you were able to have those meaningful opportunities to sit down and engage in over a meal?
Sure, and in fact, I try to go back. I, for a while, was able to go back every year, and it got to the point where I had so many baleadas that I had to finally say, like, okay, we need to take a moment here, because every family that we would see would open their home to us and invite us in for a baleada or some coffee and conversation.
For those of us that, or for those watching who are new to BECA or maybe new to Honduras, can you explain what a baleada is for everybody?
It's the most wonderful thing in the world. That's what it is. It's a warm flour tortilla with Honduran beans, and I guess they're pinto beans, but refried bean, avocado if you're lucky, some scrambled eggs, some dry cheese, and some sort of sour cream cheese. It's pretty wonderful.
And made with plenty of love, no doubt.
Plenty of love.
Natalia, as I mentioned, you started out as a summer camp volunteer and did that for a couple of years before moving on to Amigos de Jesus as a program administrator, and then San Jeronimo Bilingual School also as a program administrator. So in total, that's multiple years with BECA. So what was it that made you continue to come back and work with and alongside our communities in Honduras?
Yeah, so the first time that I actually met BECA was in 2009, and I wasn't even done with my freshman year of college at that point. And I now often joke that BECA has been the longest romantic relationship I've ever had, because I just fell in love hard, and I just haven't been able to walk away. And even though I've had to move and I can't be there, I'm still in love with BECA and the experience that I had, and I think about it all the time. So what kept me coming back was really two different things. First of all, it was the kids and the families. When you make really strong relationships with people, it's really hard to let go of that. So I fell in love with them when I visited the first time, then I went to summer camp and I fell in love with the program, and I loved being a camp counselor, being with the kids and being in the classroom. And then I got to know the students and their families better, and I got to understand the community more the longer I stayed, and I got more attached. And then the more that I took part in BECA, the more invested I actually felt in the students' lives and in the community. So first of all was the relationships that I formed. And the second reason I kept coming back was because I kept feeling more challenged. The second year that I was a summer camp counselor, I had more responsibility. I had a better understanding of what was going to happen. And then when I joined BECA as a program administrator, I got to understand BECA's work and what it meant to work in a school a lot better, and the partnerships that I was working with. And I realized that I could do more personally and professionally if I stayed on with BECA, because I just kept learning so much more.
Thank you. And I think all of those that have been through BECA have experienced those challenges and experienced the wonders, as well as Lauren mentioned, of having the opportunity to sit down and share a meal. So for you, Natalia, since you worked in multiple roles with BECA, from your summer camp experience to the administrator roles, and really the key component of that administrator role is really being BECA's representative with our community partners who are charged with leading the operation of the school that they work with. So during your time as the program administrator, what did it mean to you to be BECA's representative with our partners? And what did you learn about how to support BECA's teachers?
Being BECA's representative was a huge task. I felt like I was the ambassador for the bilingual program and for the teachers, and I was the link between the Hondurans and the BECA volunteers. It was tough, but it also taught me a ton about how the partnership worked and how I could work to make that functional too. And I also learned how volunteers could best work with Honduran teachers and parents and vice versa. It was a major learning experience for me. It was a very, very steep learning curve, but it also was really fun. So I learned that supporting BECA's teachers and partners specifically comes before everything else, because without a healthy partnership, there's no way that we could do all of the things that you need to do on a daily basis working at a school and working with a lot of people. Teaching, making everything go from when the bell rings in the morning to recess and lunch and all the class in between and everything after with the parents. So I learned that work, and I'm holding up air quotes with my fingers. I learned that work comes in many different forms. Sometimes the best thing that I could do for the partners and teachers was just to kick back at somebody's house and eat a baleada or too many and swap some stories, or just go and hang out or watch a movie with the volunteers rather than talking about lesson planning. Just getting to know each other and just being together. So in terms of working with other people, I always felt like I was just sitting in sociology class all day long. I'm not an expert by any means on people, but I credit the volunteers and the teachers that I worked with and our community partners with teaching me how to be a better listener, a better coworker, a better friend, how to ask the right questions, how to better advocate for those around me, and to show that I care about them. My emotional intelligence definitely increased tenfold by working with a diverse group of people and by being BECA's representative.
Thank you, Natalia. And I'm so happy that you bring up those relationships, because really at the foundation and at the core of everything that we do at BECA is that relationship. And Lauren touched on it as well. It's that relationship between BECA volunteer and student, BECA volunteer and community, between community and our representatives such as you, Natalia, and between BECA as a whole. It's really those relationships that we focus so heavily on and that we nourish and build year after year and day after day. And that's really the job and is in the hands of our volunteers on so many occasions. Thank you, Natalia. So Hillary, welcome. So Hillary, you have had quite the journey after BECA and have really done some amazing and excellent work. And you joined us in 2006, 2007. So you're a few years now, you're 10 years from that experience. What is the memory that you return to most often when you think about your time with BECA in Honduras?
Well, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through great.
Okay, I had really bad connection before. Well, when I was in BECA, it was when George W. Bush was president, and there was a lot of talk at that time as well about like building a wall. Even though there was, he had different politics than Donald Trump, there was still a lot of fear in Latin America about like a very anti-immigrant climate in the US. And so I had this little civics class that I created for my 9th graders, where once a week we would sit around and talk about the news, because I wanted to get them to pay attention to stuff in the news other than the sports section. And they're all 15, like really full of energy, like very bravo, like all of them had lots of personality, but they got really passionate and opinionated when talking about this like rhetoric they were hearing from the US that was very anti-immigrant. And one of my 15-year-old students said, like, Miss, why do they want to build a wall? Why don't they just help us have jobs here? Nobody wants to leave. If they help us have opportunity here, nobody will have to leave to the States. And I realized like this 15-year-old in the Honduran village had more understanding of complex causality and of inter-American foreign relations as they should be than apparently like the top decision makers in the US. And so I sort of was like, if what we're doing is elevating the opportunity for these really intelligent, high potential kids that come from this place who actually can see what solutions would look like, then they would talk about, and you don't just need jobs, you need roads to get to the jobs, and you need drug addiction programs for people who have an addiction so they can't get a job. Like my students, as you guys probably have seen too, the families down there are extremely intelligent, and they see all of these interlinked problems and have ideas for how those can be remedied. And so ever since then, I've been a big believer in the notion that those that are most affected by a problem, whether it's poverty or discrimination, are the most equipped to solve it. And so I've always tried to elevate the voices of those that are most affected and most sort of harmed by all of our various like systems of oppression and exclusion.
Yes, thank you, Hillary. And we'll go into a little bit more about your work. And it's very clear that you have made that dedication to giving the voice to the often voiceless. So thank you for that. So let's continue on to discuss a little bit more about your career paths. And Hillary, we'll stick with you. So you began your legal career after BECA at a Center for Reproductive Rights, then spent time with female migrant workers, and finally settled in employment, immigration, and civil law. So what parts of your BECA experience have remained constant through each of those different professions and through your path of your career path? What has remained constant for you?
Well, I have worked with immigrant populations from Latin America in all of those roles. At the Center for Reproductive Rights, after BECA, I was a legal assistant on cases involving women from Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, and El Salvador, who I had never met, but I could imagine what their lives were like because they come from demographics a lot like Cofradia. And those were women that had been that had died during childbirth, or because they got bad maternal health care, or that were denied abortions, or that were denied contraception, and suffered really, really bad consequences as a result, and also were frequently like age 12 or 15. So I sort of sympathized with the situation of being female in a culture and a context where you don't have access to the health care that you need, and you don't really feel like you have control over your own body and your own sexual and reproductive choices. So knowing what those communities are like helped me on those cases. And similarly, like the sex harassment victims that I represented in Eastern Washington were all migrant farm workers from Mexico, from southern Mexico, from the southern states that are a lot poorer than most of Mexico and a lot more like Honduras and Central America. So knowing what it is like on the ground in Central America is helpful in relating to my clients a little bit, even though it's not perfect. And there's so much about indigenous communities where they don't speak Spanish in more rural parts of Guatemala and Mexico that I don't know much about, actually. But just having lived in Central America, I think, is like a prerequisite for representing a lot of Central American clients. I don't know how anybody does it otherwise. And then I guess your question was, so how is it related to what I'm doing right now, I've continued to work with immigrants and otherwise just sort of exploited groups in the US where we've had this like long and horrible history of people of color and people who are very vulnerable being extra vulnerable to violence and to like sexual exploitation and to not being paid their wages, being separated from their families, whether it's through incarceration or deportation. So it sort of makes me very glad that something like BECA exists, because if there were more opportunities like those provided by BECA, fewer folks would feel the need to separate from their families and try to migrate to the States. A lot of the clients I work with wish they could live with their families in El Salvador or in Honduras, but they don't see that as an option. And being in the States is very precarious and it can be very lonely. A lot of my clients are adults who have left their kids and don't see their kids until the kids are grown. And it's not a good solution, I don't think.
Yeah, thank you, Hillary. I would love to hear maybe a specific story from that time to help us kind of conceptualize and understand, what that is during the time that you were clerking or working as a clerk. Mm-hmm.
Which time? I clerked with a federal judge in Oklahoma.
Okay.
What do you mean by what time?
Well, a story. So I'm thinking a specific story or person or group of people that you worked with that you were able to use that contextual understanding that you gained from your time in Honduras that really helped support that work with that person or group.
I guess I can talk about something Natalia mentioned that probably everyone that's worked in Cofradia would understand is like it can take a while to develop trust with anybody, but especially across cultures. If you are, and BECA is really wonderful because it already there's so much trust there in the community already. So if you're a new volunteer and you're from BECA, you automatically get some level of trust from folks on the ground, I would say. But I still think, maybe the early days when Jamie was first there, trying to, have people think like, oh, this is a gringa lady. Why on earth should we trust her? Why on earth should we invest time and money and resources in whatever it is she's trying to do here? Like, that's a barrier you have to get across. And even in my relationship with my clients' families, talking to them, my students' families back at BECA, it take many, many, many times of hanging out, of showing up, of doing home visits, of sort of trying to establish that I am here, I'm not leaving, and I care about your kids, and I want to listen to you and work together. You have to put in a lot of time to build that relationship of trust to try to get the work done. And in the practice of law for the same population, it's the same thing. I had an asylum client. No, it was a client for a U visa, which is a type of visa for victims of domestic violence, who was from rural Mexico. And it took me, probably 9 or 11 meetings with her before I felt like she was really telling me the true facts of what really had happened. Because you are asking people to, as a lawyer, to tell you very, very personal, really, really horrible facts about stuff like rape and stuff like bad stuff they've done too. Like prostitution or drug dealing, things that they're the most shamed about doing, they're the most traumatizing. And you're asking them to tell you, a total stranger, it's not from their culture. And a lot of lawyers are taught like that it's supposed to be easy. Like in law school, they don't even teach you the skill set of how to get the facts from a person. The facts are just presented like on a platter. Here's the facts, now apply the law to them. But the hard work of eliciting facts from somebody that's has been traumatized, is vulnerable, has a completely different cultural context, might have only a 3rd grade level of formal education, might not know how to read in Spanish or English. And then there's so many cultural taboos around discussing certain things. So just knowing that that it takes time and it takes a lot of time, and that nobody has any obligation or reason to trust me at the outset has been super helpful. There was my U visa case where we finally got these really key facts we needed after 9 or 11 sessions. And I didn't think that that was weird or a problem. It's just like, that's how it works.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that you tie together that relationship building and that relationship forming and nourishing during your time in BECA, in Honduras, and how that's important as well in future professions. And I think that's true as a lawyer, and I think that's also true as a physician, or it's true as a teacher. I think it's really that building that relationship and building that level of trust really allows us to leverage the work that we're doing in our professions, in our day-to-day. So thank you, Hillary, for sharing. Lauren, so you completed your master's in early childhood studies, and you taught with BECA as a second grade teacher. What influenced you to pursue a legal career?
So I actually applied through the Idealist search engine. I found the first job after BECA, and it was the combination of looking up legal and kids and Spanish. And the reason I really applied and the work hit home for me, and that was working with kids in immigration detention on the border in Texas. The reason that hit home with me was because I'd had a second grade student who had made that journey. And so the idea of sort of coming back full circle, working with the same kids in the place where I grew up was really meaningful to me. I remember his mom telling me that she was going to send him to the United States, and I remember writing a letter for him addressed to his new teacher, talking about how he was doing in math and reading and what he'd been working on. And while I doubt that letter made it with him all the way up to I think he was headed to New York. The idea that the kids that we were working with, some of them were also living in the communities that I had been living in the United States, hadn't really hit me until then. So I found a job with an agency called ProBar, a nonprofit on the border that does work similar to what Natalia does now. And like Natalia was saying, just found challenge after challenge, and found the skill set that I developed in Cofradia as a teacher, and just as Hillary was saying, just what you pick up by being there, the cultural references, the reality of life for the people that I was working with. For example, when you asked Hillary for a specific situation, what jumped to my mind was being in an asylum trial and the judge getting really upset because she felt that the witness was being inconsistent, because they kept talking about how they were doing their laundry, but then they were also referencing being able to see the cars on the street. And so I immediately pictured, washing laundry at the pila, at the outdoor, I don't even know how you say that in English, but the washboard, I guess, that's out behind the house. And I could see in my mind what it was that the witness was talking about. And I could also see from my own cultural context why it was that the judge wasn't understanding. Because in a courtroom, any inconsistency is seen as being a lie or a manipulation. So being able to bridge that for the attorneys that I was working with as a paralegal, being able to provide the experience from both sides was incredibly useful. And my biggest goal has been to be useful. So feeling that I could really fill that niche in working with Central American kids in the United States, that's what motivated me to go on to law school and to use the combination of skills to be a lawyer for immigrant kids.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren, for sharing. And very clear that, you know, the work that you did with BECA and the work that you're doing now is influencing some of the same populations who have been provided with just different opportunities that need to be served in different ways. So thank you. Natalia, you worked at, as I mentioned before, 2 BECA schools in Honduras, and now you are working with unaccompanied detained migrant children. So how does your work now compare?
I want to interrupt real quick. For those who are listening who don't know that detained means jail. Means they're in jail. Thank
you. Yep, thank you, Hillary. That's a very crucial and important point, and something that Natalia sees on a daily basis and is important for all of us to recognize and be aware of. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. That is true. My job, what I do now, is totally different from what I was doing at BECA. It's more regimented. I know what to expect on a lot of days. I don't have kids running into my office at any given moment. I don't have parents knocking on the door. Usually parents attend scheduled meetings. I don't get to go to recess anymore. So my job is really, really different. There are a lot of things I miss. But what I do now still has a lot of similar elements to what I did when I worked in Honduras. So how did I get here? First of all, I chose law because I wanted to try something new. Leaving Honduras was really difficult, and thinking about how I was going to reintegrate into life in the US was really difficult too. But I intentionally chose to move to Tucson, Arizona, to be near the border, to be able to work with kids that were just arriving from Central America and Mexico, and to better be able to understand issues from, I guess, the other side of the border. But I've always elected to work with kids, so this was a great job. Legal, kids, that's sort of what I searched for, just like Lauren said, actually. And I thought that becoming a legal assistant for unaccompanied minors was a logical step moving back to the US. I still get to work with the same population I did when I was at BECA. I mostly work with Central American children and families, also many Mexican children and families. And now I'm doing it in a way that I can be a part of them seeking justice in my own country, in the United States. So I'm definitely getting a different perspective living in the United States now. And of course, I have to speak Spanish all the time, so practice with BECA helped. Now, as a legal assistant, I still get to work with the same population. Like I said, that was a huge factor in me taking this job. And I also understand what these kids' communities look like. When I meet them in detention facilities, i.e. jail, I have an idea already of where they're coming from and what challenges and injustices they may have faced in Central America. So I can even anticipate questions to ask them that I don't think I would have been able to anticipate if I hadn't lived in Central America. I can ask them to describe things to me that I can already see in my head. And I do see a lot of my students from BECA in the kids that I meet every week. But something that is really different about my job now is that I'm limited by the parameters of the law. So I can't change the law to make for a better outcome for some of the kids I work with. At BECA, I definitely had a lot of freedom and an opportunity to be creative every day at work. I think I'm still learning the ropes, how I can be creative and have some more fun in the legal realm, but I do get to incorporate some of the things that I learned at BECA, like the fun educational aspects and practices that I developed at BECA. So for example, my favorite part of my job now is giving the Know Your Rights presentation. So I only get to do that for about an hour each week, but it's by far my favorite because I feel like I'm in front of the classroom again, or I feel like I'm at the weekly assembly again. And I get to have some fun with it. And I'm trying to think of new ways to engage the kids and make a Know Your Rights presentation feel more like a fun and motivating lesson plan, as opposed to a pretty dismal chat about law and legal relief. And then another difference I note, I think Lauren actually already talked about, is that a lot of the kids that I see, although they do remind me of my students from BECA, like maybe they come from single family homes, or maybe they have a history of trauma and abuse, but I have yet to meet a kid who's told me that they had such a unique experience as studying in a BECA school. That is a very unique, amazing opportunity that most of the kids I meet now have never had.
Thank you, Natalia. And part of what we do at BECA, and part of our long-term vision, is to equip our students with the tools necessary to access employment in Honduras, to access for further education in Honduras, and to access that social equity and equality within Honduras. So Natalia, in your experience, having worked with children in Honduras and now children in Arizona and Tucson, what are some of the factors that are at play that allow our students at BECA to really remain in their communities, even though they're facing some similar challenges that students who are in these detention facilities are facing?
So one huge thing is that the kids that are at BECA schools are I don't want to say they're at an advantage from the get-go, but they are afforded an opportunity that most kids in their communities, most kids in Central America never have. Because there aren't a lot of schools out there like BECA, the one that is run by community partnerships. And a public education in Central America it would look really different than what kids get at BECA. It just is a really, really different and unique experience for them in their community. And it's not better by any means. It's not better, but it's something that provides totally different perspective to our kids. So they have, of course, the Honduran perspective growing up in their community, but they also have different worldviews that they learn from having teachers from different places in the world, and from having a school that's run in a very unique way with a community-led partnership. So I think our kids just have a lot of different access to learning opportunities that they wouldn't have if they didn't go to one of our schools.
Great, yeah, that's great. Thank you, Natalia, for sharing. And at BECA, we do see students, and every family in the community faces different factors and makes some very hard decisions at different times. But what we hope to provide, not just as BECA, but as a complementary to our partnership and alongside the community leaders that we work with, is to provide our families with a choice. To make the choice whether to continue to high school and to university, to make the choice whether to pursue a job, to make a choice, to have that opportunity to make that decision. And I think what we see is a lot of families who do decide to emigrate aren't awarded that opportunity to make that decision. For a variety of factors. Okay, so I want to continue on to talk a little bit about BECA and just commitment to social justice kind of in general. So something that we hold very true and very dear at BECA is social justice, is creating and working side by side, as I've said a few times now, with our partnerships on equal footing, with equal investment, while also, and you can see in that definition on the slide, while promoting that just society, by challenging those injustices, and by valuing that diversity, valuing the diversity that we see in our student population, the diversity that we see with that cultural exchange between international volunteers, Honduran volunteers, our Honduran staff and our communities that we're all working together and are immersed in. So Natalia, we'll stick with you for a second. So you're clearly doing great social justice work with detained children in Tucson. So in what ways did you experience this social justice during your time with BECA?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, microphone challenge. I experience social justice on a daily basis at BECA. It's being at a BECA school, whether you work there, whether you study there, whether you're a parent dropping off food there, it's never about giving something. There's never anybody who's just giving. There was always a symbiotic relationship between the partners, between the students, between the teachers. Everybody was learning from each other, whether that was learning math in the classroom or whether that was learning Spanish with the parents. It was always learning from other people. And like Hillary said, that could take a long time. But the relationship with the partners has been established in our communities for a few years. So that's really been able to, it's been evident in a lot of ways. For me specifically, the greatest opportunity I had to witness social justice was really working with the parents, specifically when I worked at San Jeronimo, and I was the program administrator and ran the scholarship program. By far, one of the best parts of my week was meeting with the parents that ran the scholarship program, because they really were the foundation of the school. They had, first of all, access to something that they would not have had access to if the scholarship program didn't exist. So their kids had access to education, which really is a basic human right, but is not afforded to a lot of kids in Honduras. So because they were able to participate in the program, again, symbiotic relationship. They gave something, they gave a lot, they gave work to the school for their kids. Their kids got a great education. So I could give you plenty of stories about the parents, but I especially really loved working with the single mothers in the scholarship program, because they just, despite the many, many obstacles that many of them had at home, whether that was economic instability, whether that was domestic violence, any number of situations, they were able to get something for their kids, something totally invaluable, a great education, with the work that they put into the school as partners.
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you for sharing it. I think there's, like you said, there are a lot of different ways that you can see that that equal commitment and equal investment happening. And I think the scholarship program is a very apt example of the community, our parents, really taking charge and leading that growth and development of the school, serving on our school board, deciding, you know, what to clean, when to clean, what type of out of school projects they want to participate in, all for the betterment and the development of the school where their kids go on a day-to-day basis. So thank you. Lauren, so I'd love to turn to you and hear from you how your work as a lawyer has helped promote this more just society.
Background baby there. So my work now is not nearly as ideal a situation, as funny as that is to say, as the sort of world that BECA had created in Honduras has created. I think that BECA is this amazing example of how you can have this interchange between parents and foreign teachers, and there's this give and take. And what I do now, there isn't a lot of give and take. The social justice aspect to being an attorney for undocumented families is all about dealing with a broken system. And I guess that's similar in some ways to education in Honduras, but because BECA, the community school, operates outside of those sort of public school rules, it's its own thing. Now my work is it can be really frustrating to work in a system where the entire the laws that we're working within are inherently unjust. And so when I'm working with families, it's trying to explain why this place that they've come seeking refuge is not willing to provide that refuge to them. And so I feel like a lot of what I do is standing next to, or as Hillary said, raising up the voices of people who are otherwise really unable to do that. So the way that being an attorney for an undocumented family is social justice and not charity is because it's part of trying to provide some justice to a system that is inherently unjust. It's about making the system more humane. It's about reminding all the players in the system that these kids and these families are human and that they're no different from the kids and families that the judges go home to at the end of the day, or that the trial attorneys go home to at the end of the day. It's reminding them constantly, being that sort of burr in their side, that that these kids are their kids and they're here and they need to treat them like humans and with respect and dignity. So I do see my work as my current work as social justice, but it doesn't necessarily have all the warm and fuzzies like you get from seeing this small system that really is functioning.
Thank you, Lauren. And I'm going to jump to Hillary because I know she has to leave us in a second because she's working on a very important case at the moment. Hillary, quickly before you depart, I'd love to hear about, since you've worked in many different areas, how is each one being focused? And you don't have to describe each one in detail, but how have they been focused on valuing diversity while also challenging that injustice that is present in their lives?
Sorry, can you say the question again? In what areas?
Yeah, thank you. So what I'd love to hear from you, Hillary, is how has your work post-BECA been focused on valuing diversity and challenging injustice?
Okay. Well, the reason that I think it's cool being a lawyer is you're helping an individual, usually one at a time. But if you lose and then you appeal it to an appeals court and you win, then you make new law. So what Lauren was, immigration law especially, is really harsh as law. Like, it's harsh. It's not just, it doesn't make sense. It's arbitrary. You're guilty till presumed innocent. It's this terrible framework that doesn't line up with any notions of justice. But even in that area of law, if you get an opinion from an appeals court, you can move the law in a progressive way. So even though it's not as sort of one person at a time in a way that I would find frustrating if, for example, I was doing like primary care medicine. Not that I'm qualified to do that, but when you can help, it's a way that it's both very individual and I think it's really systemic at the same time, which is another reason I like it. So in employment law, which I like a lot more than immigration law, you also make a big impact even if you never do appeal and get a written opinion that changes the law, because you teach a big lesson to a huge employer. So if I win my case on behalf of an in-home caregiver who was sexually harassed, even if we never appeal, even if we never even sue them, if we just settle with them before we sue, we're teaching this huge employer that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of employees, all of whom are women of color who have very little formal education and get paid minimum wage. It's one of the most exploitative industries in the US. We're teaching them they need to not just allow sexual harassment with impunity. So I like lawyering for that reason. It's a systemic and kind of satisfying at this individual level at the same time. Whereas doing policy, trying to change systems at the legislative level, I don't have enough contact one-on-one with real human beings, real cases. It's too abstract for me.
Right, and I think you highlight a great point that as a lawyer, you're in you have a unique ability and opportunity to value that diversity by the cases that you take on and the people that you work with, and you have again the opportunity to challenge that injustice through those cases, and the opportunity that those cases will then become law and will have further impact on many people. So I know I know that you have to jump off, so I want to thank you for joining us today, and we've appreciated all of your wonderful comments and insights.
Thanks. So, thanks, everyone. I'm really sorry to have to jump off.
Okay, thank you, Hillary. So we'll continue with Natalia and Lauren, and I just want to say thank you for all of those great questions that are coming through the feed. Just a reminder that if you're listening and you have some questions, because we'll get to Q&A very quick, feel free to write those on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll pose those to our last two speakers here, Natalia and Lauren. So Lauren, I want to come back to you, and I want to thank you for that very powerful answer that you gave, and I want to talk a little bit more about your work and explicit your work at Kids in Need of Defense. So how, in your words, how does that work with Central American families work to empower the recipients? How are you working to empower those families that you're working with at KIND?
Well, I think there's two ways. The first is the most concrete one. We're trying to get the kids' status in the United States. We're trying to get them a work permit, not necessarily to work, but to be able to have some security that if they're stopped on the street, that they can show they have the right to be here. But beyond that, I see my role as showing them in our everyday interactions what it means to have an adult respect them and treat them appropriately. A lot of the kids that we work with, and I work with the same population as Natalia does, but the kids I work with are already in the community. They've been released from the jails, from the detention centers. But showing them, modeling for them what an adult is supposed to treat them like, what someone in the United States is supposed to treat them like, what they should expect from their teachers, from the other adults in their community. So I think that even when we're not able to win a case, or even if it hasn't gotten to that point yet, those everyday interactions, sitting next to a kid in court and showing that they have an advocate and a voice, I think is important.
Thank you, and no doubt for those families and those kids that sitting in that courtroom can be a very scary and overwhelming experience, and to have somebody there by their side alongside them and working for the same goal, I think is very, very important. So we touched on this a little bit with Natalia, but maybe you can get into a little bit more specifics. So BECA's work is directed at the root causes of social injustices in Honduras. And we see many families that we work with really thriving in their home communities. but many of the families that we work with could very easily have been the ones that you're working with now at Kind, Kids in Need of Defense. So what are some of the differences in circumstances between the families that you work with now and the families that you built those relationships with in Honduras?
Sure. Well, when we talk about why kids come to the United States, we talk about the push and the pull factors. What family they have here is often a pull factor. You know, what educational or economic opportunities they have here. And then the push factors in Central America, you know, might be gang violence or home violence. And I think that the way that the kids that I worked with at BECA were different than the ones that I see now. They don't look any different. They're from the same places. They speak the same way. But I think that BECA has become deeply a part of a community that is able to provide more than other communities in Central America are able to provide for their kids. Not because of any difference in wanting to provide, but being a student at one of the BECA schools gives this skill that is extremely marketable, which is not only, you know, education and thinking and creativity, but also speaking English. That is a huge factor in employment for kids that are able to speak English. They have much better opportunities in their own country. And as Hillary mentioned earlier, you know, most of the kids, most of the families that are in the United States from Central America, they didn't come to the United States with the intention of always staying here or because they, you know, thought it would be better even necessarily, but they came because they had to for one reason or another. And so when they don't have to, when there's something for them in their home country, then they stay. And I think that's the difference, is that BECA helps provide something that, you know, that helps these families stay.
Thank you, Lauren. So Natalia, in your experience, again, you've worked and worn quite a few hats at BECA. But how did BECA's partnerships build community, help increase that social capital, while also enhancing diversity? I think we might.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, there we go.
My microphone challenges. It's a big question. There's a lot that goes into it. So a lot of the work that BECA does just in general is based on relationships. So I said already that BECA and its community partners have a symbiotic relationship, and neither could exist without the other. So there would be no BECA volunteers if the community didn't want high quality bilingual education, and there would be no students if BECA didn't train teachers who are committed not only to teaching, but also to engaging in the cultural exchange that happens when they do commit to living and working in Honduras. So the community has to exist in order for the program even to exist. And that has that builds and grows over time, as it already has, and it touches every single person that is somehow involved in the BECA partnership community. So that's not just the kids, their parents, but it's also school employees, neighbors that live near the school, people that hear about the schools. Everybody is touched in some way by the educational experience that's happening in BECA. That means that all of these people are learning something, whether that's learning about people from another culture, learning how to be a better nonverbal communicator, or learning another English, or learn another language, not another English. So you mix all that together and you get the product of our schools. The kids that are leaving from our schools aren't just learning how to read and do math, but they're also learning about other perspectives and people from different cultures and what it looks like to be from another country. So they're also learning about themselves and reflecting on what it means to be Honduran as they're sitting in front of a teacher from the United States. And it's not just the students again, but it's everybody that's involved in that experience, the teachers, the parents, the neighbors. And that makes for a very interesting community as well, because BECA and its partners are not a one-size-fits-all. The student body in and of itself is not diverse in the sense that kids are from all different places. They're all from relatively the same community, but there are kids from the fanciest, most rich home in Coferdia to some of the poorest or the most disadvantaged kids, and then ADJ kids that are in extreme experiences and who have suffered horrible trauma. So in and of itself, the student body is already diverse in background. Mix that together with partners, people in the community, and teachers from different backgrounds, and it makes for a little diverse group of people, or big, I guess, since we have 3 schools. And then really, I guess what I see in the partnership and in the community of all different people is that if there's one thing that everybody has in common, something that they've learned, is that they're in that community because they want to be. And everybody has a shared vision of higher education and cultural exchange for their kid and their family.
Thank you, Natalia. And I think we see that for those that are listening who have been there, you see that on a day-to-day basis, that collective vision and collective mission of our volunteers and our parents and the students and our partners, all working for and towards the same thing. So thank you, Natalia, and thank you, Lauren, for all of your great insight and comments today. We're going to turn it now to questions, and we've had a few questions come in that I'd like to pose to each of you. And if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to share those now, and we'll get those to Lauren and Natalia. The question I want to start with first, and I think it's a very important question. We spend so much of our time working with in very challenging circumstances and with in a very emotional jobs and jobs where you can't do the work properly without really investing yourself into that. But what do you do, Lauren and Natalia, to care for yourselves? How are you also being aware of that self-care in your day-to-day work lives?
I think it's been for me different things at different times. When I was on the border doing detention work, it was salsa dancing and yoga, anything that would get me out of my head and just sort of forgetting, at least for a moment, because you do hear some really hard things, and you've got to be able to keep perspective and have joy in life. And I think now I've been seeing all these posts about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's her perspective and her advice on balancing work and family. And I think that now in being a new mother, it's really finding time in different ways and balancing in different ways. But I think that the joy that you see in children is the same thing that makes us want to work with kids and makes us want to teach and be a part of BECA. That you find a lot of energy and reward in being around children, whether they're your own or whether they're your students or your clients. So I think now that's more what I'm digging into. There's not a lot of salsa dancing happening currently, but but I do find that to be a good outlet.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, she said it. It's balance. I definitely respect my schedule. That's the best thing that I can do for myself, and I force myself to do things that are not work related. So every single day I wake up at the same time and exercise, and then I go to work, and then I take what I have to do. But then when I go home, I really try not to do work. And I know that that's easier said than done, especially if you've been a BECA teacher and you know what it means to clock out and go home and do some more work. But it is really important. For me, it's more so about sanity and emotional health, let alone being physically drained. It is a really emotionally taxing job. So you definitely need to find some way to balance life and work.
Thank you. And I think that's such an important takeaway, that for us to do this work and for us to serve these at-risk communities and work alongside them and to give our best, 9 to 5, often 9 to 9 every day, we need to also be aware and check ourselves and make sure that we're staying emotionally and physically and mentally healthy in our day-to-day lives, so that we are preparing for the work the next day. We had another question come in that I'd love to ask both of you, especially as you each have been with BECA at different times of our growth. But I'd love to know, the question comes in, I'd love to know how the BECA experience was received in each of your applications as you were pursuing future study or jobs.
So I have much less experience in this, probably because I only left BECA a mere 8 months ago. But I did apply for this job while I was still living in Honduras, and I got this job. And in my interviews, something that I heard was, "Wow, you lived in Honduras? That's perfect, amazing. You're going to understand where these kids are coming from." So that was probably the biggest thing. That still I hear from time to time. A coworker will say, "Oh, what is," like Lauren's example, "what is a pila?" And I'll say, "Oh, it's this thing," and I have a lot of context. So that was really, really, BECA's great to have on a resume, I guess, is the perfect way to say that.
Thank you. And you actually did 2 years on the ground in BECA. Did you receive feedback about those multiple years in BECA, that extended period of time? 2 years committing to a program is quite a significant period of time as a volunteer. Did you notice that in your pursuit of the job or jobs?
Yeah, definitely. I was asked what sort of commitment I might have to a new community, because I think it was so evident that I was so invested in my community in Honduras. So I was asked really what my plans were, or was I going to further my studies? I think I was asked if I was going on to get a PhD. So I said, no, I just happened to love my life and job in Honduras.
Right. Great. Thank you, Natalia. And Lauren, so you finished with BECA in 2006 and obviously continued on to pursue a legal career. And now you're working as an attorney. So at each of those phases, how was the BECA experience perceived by those either institutions or organizations?
Sure. Well, BECA is the reason why I got my first job, my first paid job anyways, out of college, working, doing Know Your Rights on the border. It's what made me a marketable candidate for them. Just like Natalia's saying, the people who were interviewing and hiring were very impressed that that I had that experience in that cultural context. And the Spanish skills, of course, were a big part of that. So it gave me an edge up, I think, an edge over, I guess, any other applicant, and opened all kinds of doors. Basically, I think, though, maybe even more importantly than what an employer thought when they saw BECA on my resume was the fact that it really informed what I knew I wanted to do. And so it informed what I was applying for. So I've carried my experience with BECA has put me on this path that now has me working with Central American kids in Houston. So it's something that I carry with me and use every day.
Thank you. And I think you echo a lot of the same feelings and sentiments of other volunteers who have pursued careers because of that learning process, both professionally and personally, that you undergo during a year of volunteering, but also during a year of that cultural exchange and really immersing yourself in a community. You learn a lot about yourself, again, both personally and professionally. So we have another question here from Andrew. What's one thing, skill or lesson from your experience teaching with BECA that you use every day in your current role? So let's say tomorrow when you go into work, what's that one thing that you will use during your time tomorrow at work that you gain from BECA or your time in Honduras?
Spanish. I mean, I know that that's something that you can gain in a lot of different ways, but there is nothing like being able to use the same words that your clients know and understand. And so I spoke Spanish before I went to Honduras, but being completely part of the community in Cofradia helped me to gain a confidence in speaking Spanish and knowing the kinds of words to use to say the sorts of everyday things you want to say to clients to make them feel comfortable. You know, they look at me and they don't know where it came from or how it is that their attorney is using these words that she has really no right to know. But I've found that to be incredibly useful.
And another thing besides Spanish would be knowing how to talk to kids. Especially when I do the Know Your Rights presentation, I hear teacher voice sometimes coming out of my mouth, and I forget that there's a reason that comes out. But that's a very limited part of my week. Mostly it's just talking one-on-one with kids. And Hillary had mentioned when you're working in this type of job, it's talking to people that are extremely traumatized, or people that have come from a horrible situation in their home country, or people that have just made a really, really difficult journey through various countries, through the desert. And especially with kids, if you work at a school, you're going to encounter kids that are having a bad day, kids that are crying, kids that experience something really, really difficult or traumatic at home, and they're going to carry that into the classroom with them. And all of the things that the kids that I work with have experienced are carrying it into the detention or jail with them. And I am charged with talking to them and figuring out what's going on with them, if they have some legal relief. And it can be really hard when I know that I'm dealing with a kid that is utterly traumatized or really, really afraid or something terrible like that. So just knowing how to navigate those situations, not just the language of how to talk to a kid, but also knowing maybe how to detect what emotions they're going through, or what they're feeling, or what they need to hear at that moment.
Great, thank you, Natalia. Thank you for sharing. So that looks like that's all the questions that we have for today. I want to thank you, Lauren, you, Natalia, and Hillary, who's now working on another case, for joining us and for being a part of this inaugural BECA webinar series. It's the first of what we hope to be many fruitful and invigorating and informational and insightful conversations that we'll have in the future. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. Whether you are new to BECA, you're currently in Honduras, or you're somebody that has worked on the ground with us in the past and is now engaging as an alumni. So thank you all. On the screen, you'll see that there are some links. If you would like to sign up for our next webinar, which will be on healthcare, you can do so by going to that link at the bottom. It's also in the live chat if you want to click on that to sign up for that webinar. More information on time and date will be forthcoming. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a great night, and be sure to join us for our next one.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.